Now, human nature, this is like us, right? In what way is this guy sitting at the bottom of a smelly cave, chained to the floor, like us? Plato would say, well, obviously the representation here is to capture our soul or our mind's relationship to the body. This guy is chained rather to the floor, and that is preventing him rather from rising up and achieving a higher order of knowledge and truth. And the same thing holds for us. It's our bodies, right? Our souls are trapped in our bodies or chained to our bodies. Our minds are chained to this lower reality, and that is preventing our minds and our souls from reaching their higher aspirations. So we have a view here of human nature. What we have then is the body chaining and holding back the soul, right, or the mind, and preventing it from achieving its higher destiny. All right, good start. 1, 2, 3. We haven't said anything about ethics. To get to the ethics, we need to bring in some more elements of the allegory of the cave. So let me get my text here and we'll read a little bit more. All right, I want to jump ahead a little bit here. There's a passage where Socrates has explained this allegory a little bit more here, and he says to Glaucon, "And now look again and see what will naturally follow if the prisoners are released and disabused of their error. At first, when any of them is liberated and compelled suddenly to stand up and turn his neck round and walk towards the light, he will suffer sharp pains. The glare will distress him, and he will be unable to see the realities of which his former state he had seen in the shadows." Okay, what's just happened is, if we take this person as our representative prisoner here, this person is released, he stands up, he turns around, and he looks toward the light. And a couple of things are significant here. First thing is a cognitive step. This person is going from a state of relative ignorance to a state of relative knowledge. Having done so, he is in a position now to say, oh, hey, wait a minute, that which I thought was real before really is an illusion or a lesser reality. And now I can see these things here. I am in better possession, right, of knowledge. So the process of education, right, has begun. And so here we have Plato introducing one of the educational implications. But notice also what he has said about the process of education. And here he is weighing in on and taking sides on one of the great controversies in educational circles. Is it the case that education is something that is pleasurable, joyful, something that we all naturally want to do and are inclined to do? Are we naturally curious, wanting to develop our faculties, right, and so forth? Plato is saying here, or suggesting here fairly emphatically, that it is not. That is not true. By having the person stand up and turn toward the light, and emphasizing the fact that in the process of doing so, the glare hurts his eyes. He suffers sharp pains. Plato is making the point, it's a point that he returns to regularly, that education is a painful process. It's not a pleasurable process. It's also not something that we naturally want to do. We naturally recoil from pain, so it makes sense then to infer that we're not going to naturally do very much by way of education, because that is a painful process. So the process of education, the process of coming to be enlightened, is a painful process. Plato is making that suggestion here, and it's an important one. Another important feature of this passage here is that he puts it in the passive voice from the perspective of the person who is the chained prisoner. The guy ends up in a position looking toward the back of the stage, the cave rather, and so has achieved a modest amount of enlightenment here. How did that come about? Well, there's a couple of possibilities. One is to say that he got curious, or he got otherwise interested in releasing himself, found a way to break his chains, stood himself up, turned around, and proceeded to explore. That's not what Plato says here. He does not do it himself. Instead, it's somebody else who does it for him. Notice what we have here. I'll repeat this. At first, when any of them is liberated and compelled suddenly to stand up and turn his neck around and walk toward the light. So what we have then is an implication that somebody else is doing the liberating. Someone comes along here, breaks the chain, forces this guy to stand up, makes his head turn around and look toward the back of the cave. And that person is the teacher. The teacher is someone who necessarily forces education upon the person. Left to his own devices, this guy would sit here wallowing in ignorance forever, but fortunately for him, from Plato's perspective, somebody comes along who has his best interests at heart, realizes that he's in a state of ignorance, and uses compulsion to break him from the bonds of ignorance, free his mind from his body, and make him do something that he ordinarily wouldn't want to do. All right, so another point here that's important, Plato is weighing in on another major issue in education. Is education something that we engage in voluntarily? Is it a matter of an inner motivation that should be encouraged? Or is education something that requires an authority figure that has to be forced on students in a top-down fashion, and perhaps even by means of a compulsion fashion? And Plato is leaning strongly toward the latter in that case. All right, this is just the initial stage of enlightenment. Plato goes on to have the person rise up out of the cave and eventually get up here to the real world. But I want to point out the language that he uses here. When we get to that point, after the guy's eyes have accustomed themselves to the very bright light coming from the fire, Socrates then says, so here's the next step. And suppose once more that he is reluctantly dragged up a steep and rugged ascent. All right, the guy has to be dragged right up the educational process, and he is reluctant to do so, and held fast until he is forced into the presence of the sun himself. Is he not likely to be pained and irritated? So the teacher takes charge of this person, drags him reluctantly up, and the upward is the direction of enlightenment, until finally here we have the guy out here in the sun. And after a while, his eyes get used to that extraordinary bright. Initially, he can't even look toward the sun, but once he's out here, he is then happy and has reached a stage of enlightenment. He can see real trees, he can see the real sun, he can see various other animals and other things that are going on. Okay, now, the sun is important here. We can interpret the sun allegorically, obviously, at all. The sun is the source of all light, hence enlightenment. The sun is the source of all warmth. The sun rather is the source of all being. And so in non-religious idealism, we can just use the sun allegorically as that which is the highest source that makes everything possible, the highest stage of enlightenment, whatever that is. In more religious forms of idealism, the sun can be and has been a stand-in for God or the gods, and so we can interpret this as achieving a kind of cognitive reunion with God himself.